How do you think that the growth of Silicon Valley and the culture of technology, starting with microprocessors, eventually software and so on, how did that pair with the culture of San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury, the hippie movement? Do those have any parallels together, or are they just completely random?
I think that they have all kinds of parallels.
All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you for attending. We are San Diego Computer Science. My name is Jeremy Fortner. I serve as the president. We are currently hybrid. We're fully operating hybrid right now. We have a couple people in person. We got a couple people online. Appreciate everybody that is showing up, however it may be. I'm brought with Jeff today. We're going to be hosting a what I think it's called a fireside chat interview. So I'm going to ask him some questions, and then after a certain portion, I'm going to open it up to the viewers. So definitely take some notes and think of some good questions. Maybe try and stump Jeff. But
that won't be hard.
Other than that, let's get started. So Jeff has worked for many different companies in technology, specifically in Silicon Valley, and very well-known startups that most of you have most likely heard of. So Jeff worked previously at Yahoo, Facebook, Dropbox, and Square during their early inceptions. So Jeff, first question I'd like to ask you, what got you into tech, and how did it lead you down the path professionally to where you are as the current point?
Wow, man, that's a big question. So good evening, Jeremy. So there's actually a couple different answers. So I'll give a little bit. The first one is when I was a very young boy, my grandmother bought these. She would go to auctions and buy they look like pirates chests full of things, but you wouldn't know what they were. They'd be like the overstock or whatever. And one time she bought 3 of them, and when she opened them, one was full of Nancy Drew mysteries, and then the next one was full of Hardy Boys mysteries, and then the third one, which is the one that she gave to me, she gave the other one to my brother, one to my sister. Third one she gave to me was full of things called Tom Swifts, which I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Tom Swift. It's like this old, very futuristic idea of like a space age kid, kind of like Richie Rich, only with touches of Star Trek in it or whatever. And I was fascinated by the ideas that those stories held in them. So I got into technology. My first computer that I got shortly thereafter was a Timex. I don't know if you guys have if these are probably in some museums you can go to now, but it was basically a computer and a keyboard that was all one unit, and you would plug it into your TV and be able to type like DOS commands on it and stuff. So this was like ancient history, but it was because of Tom Swift that I asked for that Timex computer for Christmas, and as a result of that, here I am, way too many years later, still working, still as my family would say, still one of those guys who's working on computers. They'll call Jeff, he works with computers. So anyway, yeah, that's how I got into it. And then along the way you end up with kind of pivot points where you make a decision. And I worked in telecom, and I was a network engineer for a while. And then it was, at the time I worked for a very small company that we provided wholesale dial-up internet access, which is funny to think about now, but it was the wave of the future and a huge business way back in the late 90s. When I did that, I started to see, I worked on a circuit switch network, which is old school telecom stuff from a long time ago, mechanical in nature at its core, and circuit switch networks for the phone calls that are coming in. And then we were then handing them off to modems that would turn them into packet switched, packet switch network. So it was like this total just pivot point naturally, just standing there looking and thinking about the way that the calls and the things that we're doing were working. It's like, so I know I definitely don't want to be on the circuit switch side of this. So I better learn some things about that packet switch side. And then ended up working, at the time I lived in Sacramento area of California. And so it was very simple just to move a couple hours away and right in the heart of a whole bunch of different technology based companies and using networking and network engineering sort of as a path into a broader technology organization. That's how I ended up where I am. So it starts with Tom Swift novels and ends up with I don't know, like working on business deals for telecommunications services. That's how it all works out. Anyway, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Wow. Okay.
To follow up, I'd like to ask you about what type of work you do currently. I know you work at Marqeta.
Yep.
I was wondering if you could explain what you do at Marqeta, where it's
Sure.
located, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So Marqeta, we are an embedded finance company. It's so weird because when I first started working at Square, fintech, financial technology, was like a new thing. Like there's jokes about it being about shark fins, all kinds of weird stuff. But fintech meant all kinds of different stuff, but it was always rolled up into that. So I think so. Marquetta, where I'm at now, we do what's embedded finance. So I think an easy way to think about what that means is um, we build APIs that other companies integrate their services with to complete payments or debit card issuing or credit card issuing, or it depends on what their business case is. But that's what Marqeta is. We make sure we help people move money with some open APIs. We are in Oakland, California. Our headquarters is, but we, much like your podcast or your discussion you have here, Jeremy, we call Flex First. So people can work from home or people can work in Oakland or, like whatever makes sense for those particular people. But our headquarters are still in Oakland, which is where I go almost every day. And then for what I do now, I'm actually I run a team that's called Operational Excellence, which is essentially our job is to make sure that we do what you would call total service ownership model. So the product engineering teams within our company own soup to nuts everything that goes on with their service. So they dream, they develop it, and then they operate it. But they need some help because there's some functional things that people need to do when you're running operations in a technology organization that needs to kind of be consistent across all the product engineering teams. So that's where my team comes in a little bit. We're like an overlay in that respect, that we help each one of those teams. We give them the standards for how to, for instance, manage an incident. So if there's some sort of infrastructure failure and you have to try and get services back up for customers, what the heck do you do? Well, we create those standards and we coach them through that kind of stuff. And then actually up to being on those, like when there's an incident like that, I'll be on the call half the time, more than half the time, just jump on and help to herd cats and get things up for our customers. But that's I think that's it, right? Is that what you asked? That's a big question. I want to make sure I got all of them. Did I touch on everything?
Yes, you did.
Cool.
I'd like to ask what, so you previously worked at PacWest Telecom, but you said that was in Stockton, California, correct?
Yep.
What year did you move to the Bay Area, more specifically Silicon Valley? And what was the reason that brought you there?
Yeah. So it's a big question. In around 2005, 2006, there was, quite a big meltdown in the economy. And where I worked in Stockton. I lived in a town called Elk Grove, which was just outside of Sacramento. And it wasn't, like a job center, it wasn't a big hub. And there'd been quite a bit of explosion of new real estate building. And during that time, I know a lot of people here. I don't know if most of you guys are old enough to remember, but that was a huge thing that happened around 2006 where the economy just tanked. And it was based on a bunch of houses that were overvalued for a lot of different reasons. But so at that point in time, I was like, I worked at a small telecommunications company. We made a bet that was either it had like a very short window to either pay off in a big way and our company blows up, or to not pay off at all and our company blows up in a different way. And so our company blew up in the bad way. I happened to have options to work at a DSL provider in San Jose, and it was like, that was where I wanted to go anyway. And I told my wife Rachel, she could tell you the truth. This is absolute truth story. Is that I said that we'll move. We didn't want to leave Sacramento. We liked that area a lot. And it was like I told her, okay, we'll move and I'll work at this place for a year, and then I'll get a job at a established big tech brand that people recognize. Do that for a few years, and then I'll start working at only startups 4 years at a time, and we'll just start printing our own money or whatever. And so I basically went and I worked at Covad for 1 year to the day. I got an offer from Yahoo after a year, and then I was at Yahoo for 2 years. And then after 2 years at Yahoo, I got recruited by Facebook, and I was at Facebook for 3 years, and then I moved to Square um, for 4 years. I was there, and then I went to Dropbox for 3 years, and all of those were at various stages of either. It's weird because it's not always a startup, like a mature pre-IPO company is very different than what Square was when I went there. Like, so how Dropbox was versus how Square was are completely different animals, and not recognizable to what they are now. At least Square is not recognizable to what it was when I first went there in 2012 or 13, something like that. I'm sorry, did I answer your question? I'm gonna keep asking that all the time because you ask a question, I start talking. I'm like, wait, this is some cool stuff to talk about, Jeremy.
No, yeah, you answered it.
Cool.
Um, Following up on that one, just about everybody in the club is pursuing or considering pursuing a career in technology.
Yeah.
How important do you think living, or even more broadly, just working for Silicon Valley companies, how important is that to somebody who's looking to pursue technology?
Yeah. So I think about it kind of to other industries to compare it to, or movements, right? So think about like the auto industry in America. And to this day, if you were thinking about American made cars, the first thing that probably pops in most people's head is Detroit, Michigan. Um, though there are distributors, there are parts manufacturers, there are dealerships, there are parts and pieces of the American um, automotive industry everywhere throughout the whole country, right? And I think that that's actually what Silicon Valley is like now. And it's changed. So I would say it's less important to be in Silicon Valley now than it ever has been before. But um, I do think that, like, when you think of American technology, and that's going to be a dominating, like, it's weird to call it an industry anymore, because it's more like, technology has so impacted the way that every single thing that we consume and that we experience, all of that's been changed profoundly by technology. So it's like, is making cameras that make the type of movies that go on the screens that we see these days, do you consider that really like being part of the technology industry, or is that like um you know some of the skills that people have that they need to program services to build that, make those things happen, are they can port those skills right over to something else that is actually what people would think of as a technology company. So I think it's more like, the technology industry is changing so that it's all encompassing and it's everywhere. Just like the automotive stuff we were talking, like I was talking about earlier, like there's there's little satellite parts of Silicon Valley everywhere in the United States now. But the other thing too, though, and this kind of more in line with Detroit in automotive, is there's only one Broadway, right? So think about that too. There are, even though there is burgeoning, like huge theater movement, and people, there's touring Broadway companies, there's all these sort of things. The heart of American theater, and probably a lot of the world theater, is Broadway. It's still New York City. And so I think that's kind of the way to think about it, is that you should aspire to work for a company that's, I would be biased and say in Silicon Valley, you want to work. That's where there's so many, there's an ecosystem of people who build game-changing services, and they bounce from
It's a
thing to
culture.
thing. Yeah, right. It's culture. Exactly. Yep. So yes, yeah, you want to work at a Silicon Valley place, however that is, whether that's from your couch in Poway, or whether that's going to an office in Sunnyvale, California, whatever makes sense for you.
I'd like to ask you another question
Sure.
from the perspective as a student.
Yeah.
Um, Throughout my developing and understanding what I'm trying to do personally in a career, I've always been torn on if I need to focus on technical skills more or soft skills more, networking, or do I need to take another class? How do you think that students should assess their skill set? And what do you feel as the ratio of technical to soft skills? How do you go about it?
So I'm going to answer this a little bit differently. The, the first thing that I think everybody should think about, especially when you're in school and you're just learning and you're kind of starting out as an adult, is that you have a long time to learn these things. It's not, um, you don't roll out of bed tomorrow and you're like, I'm a professional, or like whatever. So don't, I'm 47 and I still sometimes wake up and go like, dude, how did I get here? I'm like that Talking Heads song. So just understand, you shouldn't feel pressure to even understand an answer to that question that you just asked. Like, it's okay that you don't know what percentage of your success, or what percentage of your day should be like people stuff, and what percentage of it should be technical stuff. And I think the thing is, the true answer to your question, Jeremy, is that it's like a spectrum, and it really changes based on the situations that you're in, right? So if you think about it, like all the way at one end is highly technical, one end's highly personable, and you're in some situation where you're meeting with, like, some of the stuff that I've done in the past. I'm meeting with um, civil engineers and town managers or city managers at a locality like way out in Eastern Oregon, when I was at Yahoo and we were thinking about building a data center there. So when you walk into that room with that particular audience and you're thinking about that spectrum, way over here is technology, way over here is personable, you're actually probably going to have to be much more closer over to that personable side of the scale than to the technology scale for that particular situation that you're in, right? So I think, another thing that's changed a lot over the period, my career, and I've been very blessed to work in Silicon Valley, because a lot of the things that become commonplace in the workforce, in 5 or 10 years from now, are commonplace at Silicon Valley workplaces like now. So it's sort of like you can see the future coming. In some cases, there's plenty of stuff that we did at those companies that other people didn't adopt. Like, like, what the heck? Why would we do that? But in any event, that's you know, uh, Silicon Valley. What was I forgot what I was answering to you, Jeremy. I totally lost my train of thought there thinking about I was thinking about mistakes that we had made at places like Dropbox and like
I'd like to
perks.
hear about that.
Yeah. No, 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 no. I can't talk about I think I signed an NDA that I wouldn't do that. There's just there's a balance in the way that the companies it's the same thing, right? Like it's do the best work of your life and have the best work environment you've ever had at the same time. And there's sometimes a balance between those things. And Dropbox was very much known for being erring on the side of comfort of employees quite a bit. There was quite there was a lot of perks that we had at that place. But anyway, I'm sorry, Jeremy. What did I got sidetracked thinking about that? What were we talking about?
I asked you a question pertaining to how you should delegate your time.
Right, learning, right, between
Yeah,
yeah. So I guess I would say this. There's um there's two classes that I took at the bachelor's degree level. I don't know what you call that, just a degree,
undergraduate.
undergraduate, um, that I think everybody should take always. And the first one is it was just a simple web design course. And back when I did that, I was learning like HTML tags. It was like so long ago, but that's really what a simple web design, because it's sort of it helps you think artistically, but also while thinking in a different language, right? Like you're going to code something similar. I type this, it makes this show up on the screen, and a kind of thought process you have to have. But then the other one is public speaking, and um, there, I know for some people, like people who are super good at coding and building things that I know plenty of them are that are very good at coding, but they hate doing the personable stuff. They just don't want to do that. And then there's other people on the other end of the spectrum, right, who are like just super great at the personal stuff, and they just don't want anything to do with sitting in a room and writing code. They want to talk about it like they do, but they don't. You know what I mean? Like that. So the the um, the thing is to be more aware of the situation that you're going to be lend in either way, and then also to take you think about things differently. And public speaking is one that actually um, really helped me out a lot. At least learn some tips to deal with the anxiety that comes along with, um, you know, being being personable or whatever. So, like for instance, my favorite trick you guys will see if you ever see me speaking anywhere. Um, like right now, this is the best thing about Zoom. I don't have to look anybody in the face. I don't have to see anybody's reactions because I'm just looking at a little green dot right now. And as far as you guys can tell, I'm staring directly in your eyes. But before that, when I would used to do like go do like a public speaking engagement, be on a panel, whatever it happened to be, you'd find out where you're going to talk from, like where I was going to talk, where am I going to speak from, find it. And then I would find 3 points in the room that were higher than everybody, and then just bounce between those 3 points. And those are the things that you learn in like a speech class. It's like, oh my God, I'm so afraid I can't talk to all these people. I'm going to throw up. And it's like, well, cool. Then just ignore them. Pretend like they're not there. Just look at 3 spots on the wall. And so anyway, so what's up, Jeremy? I'm sorry. That was a long rambling answer.
No, I appreciate the advice. I have been looking at you though. Maybe I should be looking up here. So
Yeah.
you've had a long professional journey and it's still going. How has your role changed from the companies that you've worked for? How has it evolved over time? Do you do the same work or has your role changed?
So it always got slightly different. And like what I do now is nothing like what I did at Facebook, for instance. I've always been um, when you come into companies that are like where Square. So when I were to start to work at Square, there was 300 people, I think, about 300 people there. And when I went to work at Facebook, it was under 900. I don't remember the specific number, but there wasn't even 1,000 people that worked there then. And now I think they've got like 50,000 or something, like just insane number. And Square, I think, has like 5,000 or so. These are just totally different environments than what they are now. But when you go to a company that's like that in that kind of environment, you end up with a broad and maybe shallower skill set than in some other companies where you might go work that's a more established company with the product. It's not so much about coming up with the next product that's going to keep the company alive. It's like, how do we make a couple more percent off this and add another billion to our bottom line, like some big company or something is that you get a little bit more in those kind of bigger companies. You get a lot more experience where you can focus on a single area and get very deep and become like a super knowledgeable subject matter expert. And I think that what ends up happening is that people kind of gravitate between those two environments based on which of those sort of paths or environments makes sense for them. For me, it's always been about I like new and different and unique challenges. What's really funny is like right now, so when you're working on a company and its operations, technical operations, something breaks, all hell breaks loose. And it's very similar to what I did way back when I worked in telecom, when I used to run a NOC, a network operations center. It was the same thing. And I remember I worked at Pacific Bell, which is now AT&T, but back then it was its own company and basically managed California's public telephone network. And I was in the NOC in Sacramento, and so I was on the evening shift, and it was this time of year, around February, I think, maybe January. But there was a lot of storms that were coming through. A lot of people don't realize that way up in Northern California, some of the network backbone is still line of sight radio transmissions. And so I would look up and just see like a whole portion of the state on a map turn red, like over and over. And I was like, oh my God. And this guy comes over to me, Gene McCabe. He was a real mean dude. He was awesome though. He comes over to me and he just goes, hey, calm down. I'm like, what? He goes, that's going to happen all winter. And if you can't get through the first night like this, you're just going to die. So just like, like whatever. I'm like, I'm just going to die. He goes, yeah, I was on an aircraft carrier in World War II. Do you know what that was like? And I'm like, no, what was that like? And he goes, well, I'd walk around and sweep the deck for hours, sometimes days. And then all of a sudden there'd be a siren and I would run my ass off towards the nearest gun and just be ready to start firing. And then 5 minutes later, the siren would go off again and we'd all go back to just sweeping. He goes, just enjoy the sweeping. And so I still, like in this kind of, in the environment that I work in now, it's like that piece of that lesson that I got way back in like 1997 or something from a World War II vet still applies, because that's what happens now, like a major AWS outage in some region and you just so happen to only have, you only have assets for a particular service or something in that region. You didn't ever finish building out a second, failover region, and boom, and there you are. You're the only service for the whole company that isn't working, and yada yada. That can be stressful. Can feel like a whole bunch of airplanes coming at you once, but like staying calm and worrying about sweeping. That's what you got to do.
So we mentioned how you have evolved over your professional career. I'm curious about how the companies you've worked for, have they evolved, how they evolved, more specifically, watching them grow from X amount of employees to bigger and bigger. Do company dynamics, do they stay stay the same? Does chemistry stay the same, or does it all get out of whack once there's more people? Curious to hear what your perspective is on that.
It's very so the easy answer is it changes all the time. I think that thinking about, let's take Square as an example. When I went to work at Square and there's like 300 people, and there was essentially a credit card reader that you plugged in your headphone jack and an app that went along with it, and that was the company. And so that was making a lot of money, but we also knew that it wasn't enough to be like the badass business we wanted to be. So there's a whole bunch of other um, product lines that were kind of being dreamt up at the same time. And every 6 weeks, it felt like we were a new company, like a different company, because we now had our core. We knew what our cash cow was. We knew it was just going to keep swiping cards and keep getting money in, but we didn't know. I don't know if you guys know this, but credit card margins are not exactly huge for card issuers. They so or for the processors, the people taking the payments. But when you get to a certain stage of revenue growth, you're like, okay, well, now how do we start building other products that have the margins that drive the sort of things that investors are going to want to throw money at Square? And so you start, trying all those kind of things out, and all of a sudden, you go from just being in taxi cabs and in cash, formerly just cash bars, to being the official payments processor for Starbucks all over the whole country. And that's a completely different, those are like two very different sets of circumstances to try and manage in. And then after a while, when Square, like, oh wait, all this is really doing is making that low uh low margin business bigger. So we're making more money for sure, but we're not growing the margin we're making. So, all right, no more, we're not going to focus on partnering with really huge companies anymore. So then we become with like there's this single threaded partnership with Starbucks that we have to live with. And so kind of this part of the company becomes different than the rest of the company, and start finding other product lines to spin up, and the company changes again, right? So like every 6 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever, the company would shift and dart and change. I think that what's important to note about the companies that did the best job through that is that they were very if you use there's a psychological model called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think companies like Facebook, companies like Square, where you would hear maybe stories about in Google and all those places, right? You maybe hear stories about employees who were being like pampered, or they had too nice of stuff. I made a joke about Dropbox earlier, but that it's actually absolutely true that building a psychological safety among the people that work at these companies is very important to the companies, and that drives a different kind of achievement, right? Because people are not if you think about this, like you maybe have dry cleaning, and you have to go, you're going to go pick up lunch, and these are just things that errands that come to the middle of your day. Your conference call right before lunch goes 5 minutes late. The conference call that you had that was at 1 p.m., your boss is asking if they can move it to 12:30. So you have 25 minutes to go get lunch and drop off your dry cleaning and rush back and be at your best in a conference call and all. Well, at a place like Facebook or Google, that's not the way that it works at all, because everything is right there on the campus. So if your call goes a little bit late, you still have 55 minutes of that hour that you expected to have. You just stroll on down, drop your dry cleaning off at the spot that's already pre-designated, walk over to get whatever one of the foods you. So, all that kind of stuff is really about building an environment where it doesn't matter so much the twists and turns of the technology and the ways that the company changes and grows. It's that there's a bedrock environment for people to thrive in, and I think that's what's important.
So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's how you keep the people working for your company. You keep them inspired, you keep them um, fed, you don't
Yes.
overwork them, you give them the luxuries and make sure that they're talented.
Yep. That's
It's
it.
the,
100%. What you just said. That's it. We just solved all of the world's problems.
there we go. I want to ask you just a question
Sure.
about who were the coolest people you met in tech? I feel like you've mentioned a bunch of different people, and I
Yeah.
feel like the people of this audience would like to also know, being in
Yes.
Silicon Valley for so long.
Yeah, the first thing that's funny for everybody to understand is that anybody I'm about to say this doesn't count as name dropping because those people would have no idea who I am to this day. Like they couldn't pick me up out of a lineup. But I ran into, I think, let's see, uh, well, when I worked at Facebook, there was this period of time when it was just completely it was bizarre that you would see your workplace on like the evening news almost every night, and it was kind of like, this is just so like weird. So when I would go to work, you'd run into like strange situations. So for instance, one day I'm walking in, and as I'm walking in, somebody comes walking out the other direction, and I kind of recognize him, but I'm trying not to stare. And then he gets past me, probably like about 5 feet past me, and he turns around and I can hear him, and he's talking to me. He goes, "Yeah, I'm him." And I like turned to look, and I'm just like, "Oh, well, it's nice to meet you." Like yeah, whatever. He turns around, he walks away, and he was a jovial guy, and I'm like, I didn't know who he was, but I didn't know who he was. And so I walk inside, and the lady behind the counter looks at me and goes, "Oh, that was Steve Ballmer." I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's bizarre." Steve Ballmer just came walking out the front of the office. And then as I walk past the desk after checking in and whatever, in the hallway, they had set up a sort of impromptu studio to shoot like a television interview. And I look over, and it's freaking Diane Sawyer, like sitting there, and Mark Zuckerberg. And they're just filming an interview in the middle of the work area, right behind the door, like literally 20 feet past the door where I just walked by Steve Ballmer. Um, the only other thing that ever topped that weirdness was um, when I was at, I saw a guy, it was an African American guy, and he was with two other like really big dudes, and they were in the micro kitchen, and I was in coming to the micro kitchen, which is where we just would have like snacks and stuff. I came walking in to grab some stuff, and I caught him out of the corner of my eye. I'm like, it was the same sort of things. Like, wait, I know this. Is this a guy like I went to high school with, or like, who is this? Like, what's going on? And then my phone starts buzzing, and I look down, and it's this lady Brandy's texting me. Yep, that's Kanye. And I was like just actually just standing right next to Kanye West. It was just, and then I get later that day. I don't know. You guys were probably most of you guys were too young to remember, but there was this day when Kanye West jumped up on a table at lunchtime at Facebook and started rapping all of the songs that were coming on his new record. Well, it was that same day. Like that was the day that, like literally 20 minutes before he jumped on the table and started doing that stuff. I was eating Cheetos and thinking I was talking to my friend from high school. But there's all kinds of stuff like that. I think when you come to think about like leaders that I've worked with that I think are there's a bunch of them, but people that you guys would know, like Jack Dorsey. Um, he's one of the coolest people, like nicest human beings you'll ever meet. Uh, he I remember
Can
when
you tell the audience for those who
yeah,
might not know who Jack Dorsey is?
sure. So Jack Dorsey was a co-founder and for a while CEO of Twitter, and then he was a co-founder and CEO of Square, and then he was rehired as CEO of Twitter, and so he was the CEO of Twitter and Square at the same time. And when I worked for him, it was just when he was just at Square, and towards the end of the time before I left, he just got reappointed as CEO of Twitter. So that's who he is. And now he's not. He obviously sold part of his interest to Elon Musk, and I don't even know. I don't go on Twitter anymore. I have no idea what's going on in that thing. But he so Jack Dorsey was we were sitting in a we used to do a game day at Square. So one day every year it's like the Olympics, and everybody's on a different team, and you got to do all these events like sumo wrestling and those big suits and whatnot. And I had a lot of work to do, so I went for the morning, and then on the first bus that was taking us back to the office, I went and hopped on it, and I started watching a video that a kid had sent me, one of my daughter's friends, and I looked at it, and it was that, remember the old ice bucket challenge for the ALS? And I was like, oh damn. Like, and I didn't realize I wasn't alone on the bus, by the way. I thought I was alone on the bus. Like, damn. So I put that down, and then instantly I get another text message. This one's from my daughter, and it's her doing the ice bucket challenge and challenging me to do it. So like they do them both. Like I played them back to back within like 5 minutes. And all of a sudden I just hear this voice, well, I guess you got to do it now. And I like turn around, and it's Jack Dorsey. And I'm like, yeah, I'll only do it if you'll pour the ice on my head. And he said, okay. And then I didn't think anything of it. And we left, and we got back to the office, and I got a note from his assistant that they'd scheduled the time for me to come up to the roof where he'll pour ice on my head. So that exists. That video's on YouTube somewhere. I don't remember, but it's funny. It's just Jack Dorsey standing behind me with a giant bucket of ice.
So you mentioned you saw Mark Zuckerberg around. I believe we had
Yes.
a personal conversation where you mentioned that, correct me if I'm wrong, Facebook would have maybe weekly or monthly or daily meetings where companies would go and have a Q&A, and
Yes.
then it was Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not sure, maybe there was other people up there, but they would
Yep.
answer questions. And
Yeah.
can
Every
you tell me a little
Friday.
bit more about that?
Yeah. So every Friday, and this happened also at Square and then also at Dropbox as well. Um, at I think it was 3 p.m. local time, so 3 p.m. Pacific, everybody would shut down, and I'll go to the cafe, and Mark would give everybody an update on how the week had gone. Like, what were the things that we were trying to achieve? Did we do them? Who are our targets we're trying to sell advertisements to? And remember, when I first went there was still questions about whether Facebook was going to be a big juggernaut or if it was a fad. And so like there were things like, we're going to land Procter and Gamble, and everybody's like, okay, great. What's Procter and Gamble, you know? But so all that sort of stuff, we would talk about on a weekly basis, minute things all the way up to really big things. Eventually it gets to the point where it's to try and run that thing, because this is where we got a Dropbox. When you're over about like, a couple thousand people, and you're working in multiple time zones, you have to find creative ways to try and make those kind of things engaging. So maybe you end up with like 1 week you do it at 9 in the morning, and then the next week you do it at 3, so that you can get people from different parts of the world to join on. It just gets hard to maintain at that point. But yeah, they all basically have that sort of transparency. Like, transparency is a key to what they do. Every Friday we're going to talk about it. So yeah.
So I feel as if Facebook, yeah, it's just an app, but the social media before Facebook was a lot different than what social media was during Facebook and what we're currently living in with what now Facebook is called Meta, and we got the metaverse, whatever that entails. I'm curious how you see that the companies that you've worked for in the past, even Yahoo and Square,
Mhm.
how they not only impacted the market and stuff like that, but also the culture. How have you seen the companies that you've specifically worked for? How has it impacted the culture of technology and how we are interacting with technology today?
So I'm generally a pretty positive guy. So I'm going to start slightly negative though. After not the 2016 election itself, but like after a little, before that election, up through that period of time, and into, I guess, that first sort of congressional election thereafter, when things got really ugly. Um, I was pretty embarrassed to tell people that I used to work at Facebook. And it wasn't because I didn't believe in what our mission was or what we were trying to do at the time. It's because I felt like we knew that this was what was going to happen if there were certain product avenues that we went down, and we did anyway. Because it was uh, whatever. I mean, I was never an exec there. I never made any choices. It wasn't up to me to figure it out, and I couldn't have come up with anything better. But eventually, um, that right now I actually don't feel that way about it anymore. Um, I do think that period of time is disgraceful, and that the whole misinformation um, train was just disgusting. Um, but I've learned to just kind of like I don't really get news from Facebook, and I don't use Twitter at all, and that kind of stuff. But on the plus side, um, when I worked at Square, and we would do like we were small enough, and a lot of our customers were in San Francisco, so we could go do visits with them and see what was going on. And you'd go walk in and see like this sort of commerce that was being opened up and unlocked for these businesses around places in big cities like San Francisco, where there used to be a lot of restaurants that would only take cash because um, credit card transaction processing was really expensive, and it required proprietary hardware and like all this kind of. So we were able to like, maybe the way I think about it is we struck a blow for the little guy. Like we helped smaller companies, mom and pop shops in most cases, get money that was always out there for them to get, but they couldn't get because they didn't want to have to give too much of it to a credit card company. So that stuff was awesome. Coincidentally, by the way, 1455 Market Street, which was a building that until recently both Uber and Square were in, and we Square were on the 6th floor, and Uber was on the 4th floor. And when you would get on the elevator in the morning and go up, if anybody from Uber was on the 4th floor, it would open to their lobby area. It was all shiny and black, like obsidian, looked like something out of the Empire from Star Wars. And then you'd go up 2 floors to ours, up Square, and it was all white, like the inside of Princess Leia's slave runner or whatever, with the ship that she had that she got away, the blockade runner. That's what it is. And so we were the rebellion striking out for a little guy, and Uber was the empire, and they were like stealing from the little guy. That's the way I thought about it. Just kidding. That's just some humor, but it was funny that we had that sort of thing right there in that building.
So I mentioned about the metaverse. I'm curious, where do you see the tech industry going in terms of jobs, necessities, with current tech layoffs that are happening, automation, uh, AI, robotics? Where do you see the future of it? Where do you see the demand?
Yeah. So I think that um maybe not cryptocurrency, and maybe not the metaverse. Um, but when you think about those sort of like broad concepts in a little bit more of a practical way, like it's very easy to see that in the future, all of us are going to have a digital identity. That's really what the metaverse is. You know what I mean? It's like you're going to have a digital,
Mhm.
you don't have to be a cartoon character or a rabbit who plays techno music or any of that sort of stuff, but but you do exist in this, you know, the techno realm or whatever the heck it is, you know. And so when I say crypto and metaverse, that's the sort of thing that I think about, is that actually um, a digital you uh, requires, it doesn't require different, maybe not digital currencies or brand new currencies of money, but it does require new ways of owning and managing things and tracking stuff, right? So I think that's kind of a thing to watch out for. Like to I think a lot of people think that when you say the word crypto and they think about Coinbase and FTX, and it's much broader and bigger than that, right? That's just scratching the surface of what's required to build like a digital infrastructure that the world runs on. And so I mean, I think that's stuff that's interesting to me. Embedded finance, where I work now, I love it. That's absolutely. There's so many different ways that um, the financial world is changing, and um, working in the sort of companies that are serving as the engine to build those things is, you learn a lot of stuff. Like I remember learning about crypto mining in 2013 or something. You know, you're like going, what is crypto mining? What the hell's that? You're mining what, like, you know, and now it's just like a thing that people do, right? So like, yeah, it's an interesting part of the industry to work in for sure, and I like it, and I hope to stay working in embedded finance forever and ever. Actually,
So digital identity, that's what you're saying. So when you reference that, are you talking about intellectual property, or because most easiest the easiest thing to kind of understand when you mention like digital property would be how you manage finance. What are other things
yeah,
that could be determined as something that you would need to classify as digital? For example, there's stuff like NFTs, which are um,
yeah,
they
like
have a address.
non fungible tokens.
Yeah. What other than finances could we see as
I don't know, because like this is this is a cool thing, right?
mhm,
We're actually living in on the precipice of a time where a lot of things are unknown. Like we don't know. There's never been a time when you had to worry about how you manage your digital cow,
mm,
right? Like there is now, but there never was before that. So we're going to be figuring this stuff out as we move through it and as we go forward, and um, we'll find exciting new ways to live our lives with all this digital goodness, or you know, like um, and what have you. Uh, but you know, I think a lot of you talk about things like Facebook and social media and what it is now versus what it was when I started working there in like 2009. Um, there's so much about your digital identity that has yet to be defined, right? But has been, but exists somewhere. Um, you know, and so it's like those twists and turns that are coming. I don't know that we're going to be good at, like any of us right now are going to be good at predicting okay, so what's going to be a big thing in digital identities 6 years from now or whatever, or longer time frames too, like are obviously going to be even harder. Um, but we can, in a general sense, the world isn't going to get less digital, right? It's actually going to get more digital and more and more and more digital to the point where, like, 10 years ago, people would have laughed if you said you could walk into like Pete's Coffee and get your latte with your watch, right? That you ordered with your watch. You walk in, you just swipe your watch and grab your coffee. Like that seems like crazy talk not that long ago. So I think it's more about thinking about those big trends um and things that are going to become new utilities. That's another way to think about it too. Jeremy, I know you and I are musicians, right? So you get a Les Paul 1968 gold top Les Paul means something in your hands when you're playing, Jimi Hendrix or the Doors or whatever, and you're playing through that instrument. It's something tangible, it's something you can feel, it's something. And then when you're done doing that, you can put it on a hook on the wall, and all your friends can admire it, and yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that makes the value of that guitar like something insane, right? What's going to be the thing that makes NFTs values um like what's the utility that makes those sorts of things more valuable in the long run and more consistent consistently valuable, because that's another thing, like with NFTs and that kind of stuff, there's a lot of like roller coasters and market crash and yeah, yeah, yeah. But uh what makes it more predictable and more of a common thing going forward? And I think that's a question that what's exciting is that's a question that hasn't been answered yet, but there will be one at some point. It's going to make sense, right? There's going to be a digital you and a digital, you're going to have to find a digital way to own digital stuffs and all that kind of thing. So anyway, sorry, yet another tangent.
I'd like to go back and ask you a question regarding, I looked through all your work experiences. You've been a manager, you've been a
Yeah.
director, you've been chief strategy officer. This means that you're leading people. I'm curious, um, what is your philosophy for leading people? How do you get people to get behind a cause and do their best work?
Yeah. So um I think the most important thing is to give people, experts, to recognize the expertise of the hands-on people that are doing the job, doing the work. And um remembering what your job as their boss is it's not to tell them what to do or to be in charge or any of that sort of stuff, right? It's actually, as their boss, your job is to inspire them to do the best work, to allow them to kind of, one way to do that is to allow them to define what the best work is and what needs to be done, and that kind of thing. So we just went through an annual planning cycle at my work, so I'm really thinking a lot about uh, how we collaborated uh, with each other to come up with goals that stretched across an entire organization, and then um, how there was no drama doing all that. And the reason is because we started with, here's what the CEO says we have to achieve this year. Here's who's on our team. What are we doing? Like, what are our initiatives? What's number one? What's number two? Um, why do you want it to be that way? And then we kind of, hashed it out in that kind of environment where people, it's like, it's strange because you hear, it's like sometimes you might hear someone say things like, they take ownership, or you have to give them ownership of their work or whatever. It's like they're going to own the work one way or another, right? It's just like the question is, how much do you value that ownership that they have for it? So uh, really getting teams on the same page and pulling in the same direction is the magic bullet for productivity and success and all that. And you, it's the key thing to remember is that it's different. Um, how you how you get people on the same page and how you pull people along and all that. It's going to be different from team to team and company to company. So like when I worked at Facebook, I left Facebook. I went to work at Square, and at Square, I worked with a lot of people that I'd worked with at Yahoo before, but I didn't know them so well. Then after I left Square, I went to Dropbox, and a lot of people that I worked with at Facebook were at Dropbox. And we didn't have at Facebook, we had this crazy environment where we went from having, I think like when I started working there, 300 million people use Facebook service around the world. And when I left, it was way over a billion. And so the crazy pace and the amount of work that you have to do to make all that happen, and you know, like just we became a machine. So then when you try to engage the same machine in a different company with different products at Dropbox, it sucked. Within 18 months, I basically was the only person from that whole crew that was still there. Everybody else left. So you have to be aware of the fact that um, there's sort of like three things that are important to effective leadership. One is, who is the leader? Number two, who are the people who he or she is leading? And then three, what is the situation that those two distinct groups find themselves in, trying to make progress?
Interesting. So the first principles of why everybody's even there in the first place.
Yeah, right. It's so we use at Marquetta, we use what is a Salesforce technique for that. Salesforce company is called V2 Mom. I don't know if you guys have heard of this thing, but it's V, like the letter V, the number two, and then MOM. And what it stands for is vision and values. So that's what the two V's are. And then MOM is um, methods, obstacles, and measures. So methods are basically, what are we going to achieve? Obstacles are, what are the things that are in between us and achieving that? And measures are, how do we measure it to know that we actually achieved what we said we are going to measure? But the visions and the values are the important things at the very top as you start with. What's the vision of your team? And my particular team that I'm in now is we protect Marquetta and our customers from threats of every variety, because we do. It's operations. Anything can go wrong at any point in time. So that's our vision. But then what are the values that back that up? And then we have like 6 value statements. And when you kind of nail those things together, it's pretty awesome. And the team pulls itself in the right direction, I think.
So I've 2 more questions,
Sure.
and then we're going to open it up to the audience. These last 2 are kind of philosophical, so interpret them how you'd like. But you look at humanity and you see that we first started maybe with fire and then the wheel. And at a certain point, we hit technology, and you can see the growth of technology in many different ways. You can call it exponential. You can look at things like Moore's Law. A lot of what is happening now has been somewhat predicted, even by people like Alan Turing in the 50s, up to Asimov and the 3 laws of robotics, and what he spoke about AI in the 90s, when nobody really even knew what that meant. I'm curious what you think about, do you think that innovation and creation is an innate part of human structure? Is that essentially what we're here to do? Are we just creating more and more? Is there any point where we stop? Or is that fundamentally what we're here to do, is just keep going forward into the unknown?
Yes. That actually, that's a huge question. Very good one. I don't know what people are here for, but I've always had the hankering, or the feeling, the understanding that it's to be here for each other, to do things for one another, right? And So I think from that perspective, then there will never stop, right? There's always going to be new things that we need to do in order to work with each other and take care of one another, and that kind of stuff. I think that there is an interesting pitfall, or like a line of thought that could come from the way when you think about this. And there was this book that I read, and I cannot remember what it was called now, way back in high school. And there was a machine um, that made everything. Like people would just bring the raw materials, put it in, tell the machine what it's supposed to be, and it would spit it out. And then one day the machine broke, and nobody knew how to make anything. So the society fell apart like really quickly, devolved into nothingness. And I mean, that's an interesting, I guess, metaphor or way to think about um, the dangers of relying on too much automation, or too, you know what I mean? Like things that, like, not
Mhm.
knowing what's really happening under the hood. But um, I mean, the simple answer is we're going to find new ways to do crazy different things. Everything changes. So I say embrace the bright, bold new future, and you know, get those eye implants when they're available.
Interesting.
Kidding.
So my last question,
Yeah.
um, I like so Steve Jobs and Jerry Garcia, they lived like 13 minutes away from each other. How do you think that the growth of Silicon Valley and the culture of technology, starting with microprocessors, eventually software, and so on, how did that pair with the culture of San Francisco, Haight Ashbury, the hippie movement? Do those have any parallels together, or are they just completely random?
Oh, I think that they have all kinds of parallels. I think it's actually, you kind of like step back and think about it broader. It's even more than that. It's like there's regions here in the Bay Area. There's the East Bay, which is like Oakland centered. There's San Francisco, which is the sort of the tip of the peninsula, and then in the South Bay there's San Jose and Silicon Valley all around it. And there's a spirit that runs through all of those. So it's like, okay, they're all different, they're all unique, they're whatever, but what makes the Bay Area is this unique spirit that runs through all those places. In Berkeley, you have the 924 Gilman Street Club, where the 90s punk rock Berkeley scene exploded out of. It just came out of there, and it was a DIY thing. People just went, they set up their own club, and next thing you know, it's launching Grammy winning superstars. And well, not far down the road, not far after that, not long after that, there is in Oakland, there's a blog called Athletics Nation, which is like a blog that a guy named Tyler started to cover the Oakland A's, because he didn't like what coverage that they got in the local newspapers, right? He, not that he didn't like it, he just didn't, there wasn't enough for him or whatever. So he's a fanatic. So he starts making this, right? And eventually Athletics Nation becomes um, Daily Costs and uh, Vox Media, like, so it's like you have this little, these things, like, in those two, the reason I call it like 94 Gilman Street Club and Athletics Nation is because they're both DIY things that started maybe like 10 miles apart from each other and just turned into world changing things. And that was all the way in the late 90s and early 2000s. And what you were talking about was back in the 60s, so it's just kind of a way of life, in the way that um I guess it's something in the water that's in Northern California, in this particular part of it, in the San Francisco San Francisco, Oakland, Bay Area, whatever you want to call it, that there's people who, um, if you call somebody unique, they take it definitely as a compliment. Um, and they do it and we do it in all kinds of different things. Doesn't matter, music, movies, uh, technology, business, it's all there. And so I don't know what it is, but it's awesome.
Yeah, you brought up the Oakland A's. I feel like the Oakland A's actually are a good pairing of those two separate cultures, being a low budget team and figuring out how to win using sabermetrics and computer science.
Yeah.
I feel like that the culture of the Bay Area is something that everybody who's interested in tech, they should definitely go and at least visit and consider it.
Yep. Agree. So now we got questions. Is it time to
Yes,
do these
so
projects?
appreciate everybody listening to me. I'm done talking. Thank you, Jeff. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. And if you're in person and you have a question, you can come up here and take this speaker seats. Feel free to introduce yourself and then go ahead and state your question.
Hi, my name is Claire. I'm actually new here. This is my first time in this club. I have two questions. One, what were your job responsibilities at Facebook? And two, what does your sweatshirt say?
So one at Facebook, I worked on the well, it changed a lot, but when I first went there, I did network planning. So like when we were building new data centers, I would help figure out where we could lay fiber optic cables and blah blah blah. Very boring stuff. But infrastructure is the internet infrastructure is really the way to think about it. My jacket or my sweater here, this is over here. It says Oaklandish, and that's just a
Uh,
company up here in the Bay Area that makes cool apparel.
okay, so you weren't working on Metaverse back then,
No,
right?
no.
Okay, cool. All right,
Uh,
thanks.
yep.
We have another question coming.
Hi. Um, okay. Hello. Thank you for speaking with us tonight. My name is Brian. Um,
Hey, Brian.
yeah. um, I don't really have much of a question, but it was more about what you talked about with the digital persona.
Uh-huh.
And um, when you were talking about it, I was kind of running through my head with how originally with the internet and like personal life, how they kind of clashed with it starting with from like early 2000s where you had your own personal life, you were completely anonymous, and then when the internet became more commercialized, you could there was more escapism route for people that weren't really in that didn't really fit in with society. And then as it progressed, there was this push and pull between um, where or where you said it was the internet was always going to be always growing and more integration with online personas, and kind of with what we have now with social media, where there's kind of this or some people believe that social media is everything to them, where their persona is social media, and if they don't have it, they don't exist. I mean, it's not a question, but kind of what do you kind of think about that with how social media is kind of taken over?
Yeah, I don't.
Sorry, it was
No,
kind
it's
of
okay. No,
yeah.
it's fine. I just say, I think that it's a shame that um, social media has taken over in some ways. Like I don't know. I feel like without being super religious or anything like that, there's stuff that like the Four Substitutes for God's thing written by Thomas Aquinas, like way back in the 1200s, and that actually explains what's going on with social media. It's people being attracted to and lifting up the wrong things, like worshiping money. It's like people caring more about what brand shoes they have than the type of food they're eating, that kind of stuff. So anyway, I feel like all that is just, it's like an extension of a long problem that runs in society that hopefully someday we'll lick and figure out. But in the meantime, just care about the people around you as human beings and don't worry about them as digital objects.
Thank you. Great.
We have another question coming up.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Victor. I have a question about work-life balance at these huge companies, which obviously have very ambitious goals. How was your work-life balance back then, working at Facebook and all these other companies?
Garbage.
Okay. So
Yeah, it was not Facebook's fault or Square's fault. It's very easy to lose track of what's important when you're focused on what's not, And what I mean by that is like you're really focused on people admire me, look at how cool I am, look at this company I work for, all that kind of stuff. But they can drive you to do some really insane things that just don't make sense. Like, there's a time when I spent in the office for we had projects going on in Brazil, Tokyo, Frankfurt, and then a couple parts of the US at the same time. And I ended up staying in the office with a 4-hour nap for like 38 straight hours or something. And, my wife and kids didn't deserve that crap. So all I'm saying is it wasn't their fault that I did that. And it wasn't Facebook's fault. But work-life balance is something that I'm glad you're asking that question when you're at your ripe young age, because when you get older to my age, you won't be bitter and pissed off about all the stuff you screwed up.
thank you.
Yeah.
We have another question coming up.
Man,
Howdy.
all kinds of questions.
Yeah, I guess someone here has to ask a boring question.
Go for it. Ask away.
Yeah, I guess for the students' sake, is a career as a network engineer still, do they have a future with, all the virtualization and cloud stuff? And yeah, I guess,
It's
Mhm.
weird, right? Like I think when I was a network engineer, like what I did then, like people don't do now at all. So I think that sure it'll change. There'll be less network specific engineers, like line's already getting blurred with I remember when Python scripting was like just this, holy crap, we can automate like these little network functions with Python, this scripts in this language called Python, right? And like now it's like table stakes that you understand Python in order to be able to do anything in infrastructure, not just networking, right? Like it's so I guess I don't think that there's going to be network engineers in the way that there were network engineers in 2000, like 2001, 2002, that kind of stuff. But I think there'll always be network engineers. It's just what it means to be a network engineer is going to evolve, and it'll always get more and more like being a software engineer. At least that's what I've seen over like 30 years of it. Like I remember people used to say, "No way, network engineers won't be replaced by software engineers." It's not replaced by. I don't think about it that way, but it's like, yeah, very little by little, every piece of the network has become a software application, right? And it's going to keep going that way. So
Yeah, so I guess if not in network engineering, then what should students be studying? Like, what are the hot fields to work at?
I mean, the one that's obvious, maybe, and I don't mean to be is security. And I think that when we think about information security in the industry, in the broader industry, that for a long time people think you have to be like a hacker, or like you have to be like some character out of a TV movie or something to work in um, digital security. But there's a lot that goes into working just in a security organization, right? There's things like detection and response teams, which are people who are out right now um, analyzing attacks that have happened at other places, and then writing Python or in Golang or something else scripts to automate detections to see when someone's trying to attack you in that similar kind of way, right? So that's like, and that's just one part of being on a security, an information security team. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on. So I think that that's kind of like when I mentioned, thinking about digital. There's a digital you that's going to exist, and that's sort of the general current of things. I feel like that really lines up well with working in security as well too, because protecting people's digital assets is only going to get more and more important, because and more valuable, and there's a lot of things that people who are on a quote unquote security team do that are different than what we talked about here. So I think that's definitely one area to think about. I don't know. Also, just being a general software engineer, like, come on, everybody needs software engineers everywhere. So if you like to write applications, make it happen.
Yeah, what's it like interviewing for, I guess, software engineer and security engineer roles at those companies?
Man, like engineering has changed so much. I mean, interviewing has changed tremendously. Like I remember I went to interview at Google a long time ago, and I was asked a question that was something like, if you were the width of a nickel and you fell into a blender, and like, I mean, it was like I'm making that up, but I'm maybe not that far off from the way the question actually was set up, right? And so you'd be sitting there like, oh, what the hell does that have to do with, with a networking question? Like it just doesn't have any damn thing to do. And so I've seen like that sort of outsmarting, trying to get people to outsmart themselves, like that sort of trend that was really huge in the like 2000 like up to around 2010, 2015. Like that's sort of a thing that I don't see as much as I like used to see. It's hard, right? Like these interviews. So when you go into interview at a company, you usually start with a screen like anywhere else, but after that, it's like you got a 5 or 6 person panel that you're going to work through, and all of those people have predetermined things that they're looking for in you, and they're going to be picking at you about, and they really want to see how they can trip you up, and also what good things that you bring to the table are. So it can be everything from like a coding interview to I think sometimes they call them cultural interviews, although I don't really like that word, because I don't feel like companies have cultures, I feel like that's like countries and regions and stuff, but we have environments. But same thing, like, how will this person adapt to the environment? What are the questions you're going to ask to try and set them off? And so you're usually pretty exhausted after a day of interviewing with one of these companies, that's for sure.
Does it matter like what school you went to or your grades and all that stuff?
Mine didn't. That's what I love to tell people is that I went to I think 7 colleges to get my bachelor's degree, and I finished it at University of Phoenix. I went to National University to get my MBA. So I didn't go to any, like I didn't go to Princeton or whatever. And although funny story is when I worked at a place called Covad in San Jose, somebody thought I did go to some Ivy League school, and I got invited to the Ivy League grads. Like I would just go every month and never told anybody I didn't go to. I didn't really go to whatever school they thought I went to, but it was fun. But yeah, no, I think the other thing that we should think about when you say does the school matter or whatever, for certain things, sure, like right, like absolutely. Trying to think of an example now, and I'm drawing a blank, but there's certain like biotech, there's certain fields or certain technologies and things that you need to understand that there's cream of the crop colleges that are making it happen, but can you get a job at a place like Facebook or Dropbox or whatever and have a degree from University of Phoenix? Yep, I did.
Did you have to network to get an interview, or did they pick your resume out of the pile?
I had most jobs, I think that like after you get your first few jobs, right? After that, almost every job from there on out is some way involved. It's like more like what percentage of networking got you in that position. In Facebook, in Square, we're all 100% networking. I didn't even actually apply to a job. And there were just people, they knew they were looking for somebody, and people that I knew worked there reached out and said, hey, they're looking for somebody that can do what you can do. You interested to come talk? I'm like, yeah, sure. So networking is huge.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's a lot of questions. Jeremy's back. Is that it?
I'm back.
Are we done then?
I think we're done.
All right. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you everybody for listening to me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you answering all these questions, and showing up and getting set up and getting philosophically challenged and technically challenged. And
It was a gauntlet. It was a gauntlet, baby. All right.
but
Cool.
seriously, I do appreciate your time. Thank you for educating us students.
Thank you
different.
for asking me to come on, Jeremy. I appreciate it. You're one of my favorite people in the world. Love you, dude.
Right back at you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, thank
See you, Jeff.